This morning, we're going to talk about the church. And it's actually a great time to talk about the church because we are on the heels, at least we hope, we are on the heels of a global pandemic. A global pandemic where our in-person services move fully online. A global pandemic where our fellowship events and our gatherings either ceased or they moved to Zoom. And as we have made these changes over the last 2+ months, there has been a blasting question, at least for me, there's been this blasting question that has just echoed in my mind through all of it, with every decision we made, with every alteration we had to make. What is the church? What does it mean to be a church? In 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 4, God, through the pen and the personality of Peter, gives us an astounding answer to that question of what it means to be the church. The church is a temple. It's a spiritual temple. It's not a building primarily, but primarily it's a temple built of people. Every person who places their faith in Jesus Christ is a stone that is fitted into a spiritual house, a temple for God. The church is a place where God dwells. Each of us, as our stones come together and they build up into this temple, we become the very place where God's presence in a special way dwells. We're not just a human institution. We're an institution ordained by God. That's why when we have committee meetings, we begin them and we end them and we embed them with prayer because we know that this is not something that we just build on our own, but we throw ourselves on the mercy of Christ and depend on Him to build this God-ordained structure where God dwells. But something very exceptional has happened over the last few months. Something exceptional that may never happen in our lifetimes ever again. And we did something that was highly unusual. We decided to stop gathering in public for worship. We had good reason to do it, but it was odd. I remember that first Sunday when we had canceled our face-to-face worship service. It was just eerie walking into the building, and I kept thinking to myself, why in the world are we doing this? This is so bizarre. I knew it was the right thing, but it was just bizarre. And I remember exchanging correspondence with Father Bechtel here in town, and he had said to me that, there is no priest alive today who can ever remember a time when the bishops ordered Mass to stop. We did it because there was a health threat that because of our love for our neighbor and our desire to mitigate any threat to our neighbors, we stopped meeting. But it was unprecedented. There had never been a time when that type of public safety required us to forsake something that was so essential to who we are. David Lloyd Jones was a preacher, a Welsh preacher, in the 1940s to the 1960s. And during his ministry, the technology became available to record sermons on tape. So a group of people, according to how the story goes, approached David Lloyd Jones and said, we want to start recording your sermons on tape so we can start disseminating them all over the place. And at first, David Lloyd Jones resisted. He eventually gave in, and we're grateful that he gave in because we have a huge collection of just these wonderful sermons. But he resisted for a very valid reason. he said that there was a huge difference between listening to a sermon in your home and listening to it in the middle of the presence of the people of God. He said the dynamic that exists between the people of God gathering in one place, the physical presence of the preacher, and the presence of God that meets with the people in that gathering was dynamically different than going off on your own. One was a communal experience, the other was an individual experience. And he resisted because he didn't want to compromise that communal experience. He actually said that a sermon wasn't a product, but it's a participation. So we did something incredibly unusual. We stopped meeting together in person. However, as we begin to transition back to in-person worship services, we're kind of in a hybrid state right now, but as we move in that direction, we don't want to lose that communal act of what it means to be a church, a place where God gathers together his people, to speak to them in a unique way that only happens when his presence is there with the presence of the people. And it doesn't just mean a sermon, it means the whole service, the music, the liturgy, the prayers that we say together. Because here's the thing, you don't want to miss church. You don't want to miss church because Jesus just might show up. There will be times during a worship service where you will taste the Spirit of God in the air. You will feel the Spirit of God in your heart. You will feel energized to leave and serve God, to embody and demonstrate him and his goodness through your minds and through your heart and through your hands. You don't want to miss church because Jesus just might show up. The church is a temple, but it's also a temple that is built in a certain way. Peter calls Jesus the cornerstone of the spiritual temple. It's a term that Peter did not come up with on his own. The Old Testament prophets, when they were talking about the Messiah who would come, they referred to the Messiah as a cornerstone. And in ancient building practices, the cornerstone had a very important purpose. The cornerstone was the singular determining factor that shaped the entire structure. The size of the stone, the weight of the stone, where the stone was placed determined how the rest of that structure would be built. Everything was built around it and upon it. It determined how everything would be built together. Jesus has forever been the plumb line and the measuring line of the spiritual temple that is the church. And there has always been, generally speaking, two building projects going on throughout all of history. Every project that we have, generally speaking, can fall into one or two building projects. There's the building projects that partner with God and build on this cornerstone. They build around it and upon it in order to make a name for God, in order that the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, might be exalted to his position as the King of all the universe. The other building project joins the people in Babel to build a tower up to the heavens so that they can make a name, not for Christ, but for themselves. That's why for Peter, the exact same stone can be called two totally different things. If you look at that passage in 1 Peter, you will notice that Peter calls the same living stone, on one hand, a cornerstone, but on the other hand, a stumbling block. For those who build upon and around the cornerstone that is Jesus Christ, that stone's going to uphold them. even when life gets really, really tough, that stone will uphold them. Even when there's a pandemic, even when there's national division, that stone will hold you up. It'll keep you in place. You're not going to fall out of the structure. But for others who don't build, who don't trust in that cornerstone, who cast it aside because, it doesn't seem fit or worthy to be a cornerstone. They just cast it aside and they begin to build their own structure in their own name for their own purposes. It's going to be a stumbling block. Because one day, at the end of days, they're going to find out that the stone that they cast aside was actually the only stone that they could build their entire lives upon. The rejection of Jesus Christ will be detrimental. And they will find out that the one that they passed by was the one that they should have been building their life upon. Now, some people, when they get to a passage like this, particularly non-Christians, they will say, see, look, that's why I despise Christianity. It's an either-or religion. You're either in or you're out. I have no desire to be part of an exclusive religion that worships an exclusive God. I want nothing to do with it. Well, I would actually argue with you that Christianity is far more inclusive than any other option out there. Let me explain why. Objection number one. Christianity is an either-or religion. It's binary. You're either in, you're either out. The fact that you are hearing my voice being processed through a digital board, that you are seeing my face on your TV, is a result of a binary system. Computers operate on groupings of ones and zeros. It's either a 1 or it's a 0. It's either on, it's either off. It's either an orange or it's not an orange. It's either raining or it's not raining. So to say that you cannot have any sort of worldview that is binary is in fact exclusive itself, because it says, I will not accept anybody that accepts binary views. It's exclusive in itself. Objection number two. Christianity is unfair. We have lots of institutions that are in some way exclusive. Would you ever criticize a college for accepting some people into their programs while rejecting other people from their programs, as long as they were using a fair standard to do so, as long as there was some set standard? Would you ever criticize that? We have lots of social organizations, lots of institutions that admit people and they reject people, all based on a standard, on a grade, on a test score, on an essay. There's something. Christianity, though, is actually more inclusive than any of these things. Christianity says that, according to the Apostle Paul, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We're all in it together. None of us are in a better state, and some people are in a worse state. None of us are more farther off from God, and others of us more closer in our natural inclinations. None of us are. We're all in the same mud pit, and all of us are unable to pull ourselves out of it. We're all in the same boat. However, the Apostle Paul goes on to, and it's a good summation of Christianity, all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption by Jesus Christ. It's freely given to all. It's not excluded from anyone. You don't need the right grade. You don't need the right test score. You don't need to be able to write the right essay. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter what your intellectual level is. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in. Everybody has access to this faith. It precludes no one and includes everybody. Everybody can come on in. And that's part of the reason why Christianity, at least as Jesus gave it to us, is so often offensive. For the first century Jew, to say that you could be saved without following all of the religious observances was an offense. Christians were letting just anybody in. The Jews found it offensive. For the first century Roman, who believed that in order to be acceptable, you needed to be an upstanding Roman citizen. You needed to embody the Roman virtues. You needed to have honor. Christianity was offensive because it didn't go along with all of the Roman virtues. It didn't follow everything that the Romans did. The Christians didn't go to the theater. They didn't go to the races. They didn't go to the gladiatorial games. They didn't do the things that Romans were supposed to do. It was offensive. Today, Christianity is offensive. We say that anybody can come on in. At least that's what we should be saying. Anybody can come on in. You don't need to live in the right neighborhood. You don't need to hang out with the right people. You don't need to have the right reputation in town. Anybody can come in. This grace is offered to everybody. And it's offensive because we want some standard. We don't want God just letting anybody in. We want some standard that he has to follow, and it's offensive. And even today, we sense that our faith is pushed to the margins. To a lesser degree here in Pennsylvania, but to a greater degree in other states, the civil leaders have been saying in certain localities that faith communities cannot gather. Can't do it. But at the same time, some of those very same civil leaders are seen participating in protests where there's hundreds of people and it's going completely unchecked. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be protest, but for the Christian, the message is clear in some of those localities. Your faith does not matter. It's no different than going to the movie theaters. It's no different than having some hobby. Your faith is just a hobby. And we feel that. We're not being persecuted or killed like the people in 1 Peter's letter, but we feel a little bit of that ridicule that somehow faith communities are something less. But here's the thing. Even if Christians are rejected, and we should expect to be rejected, if the living stone was rejected, if he was cast out as a stone not worthy to be the cornerstone, it shouldn't surprise us that those who build on him and build their lives around him would be rejected too. But here's the thing, we will never be put to shame. Because here's the thing, we have the real stone. The stone that we build on, we can be sure that that is the stone that will support. Imagine the world without the church. Why do Black Lives Matter? Is it because of our intuition that it's true? Is it because of the public consensus that it's true? Well, what about the intuition? What about the public consensus of the slave owners in the pre-Civil War South? There has to be some moral objective to say that Black lives matter. And the church, they've always known it. It's the same reason that Latin American lives matter. It's the same reason that Asian lives matter. It's the same reason that deformed children's lives matter. It's the same reason that unborn children's lives matter. Because each and every one of us, every human being, has been made in the image of God, that they are an image bearer, that every single life has intrinsic value, worth, and is worthy of respect because they are in the image of the very one who created the entire universe. Can you find that anywhere else? Abigail Stiers, who wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, she's a Jewish author. She wrote this: if churches and synagogues had fought to reopen sooner, and we can debate that, but I like what she says next, maybe the riots would not have happened. Pastors might have channeled the fury of their congregants toward higher purpose, as the Reverend Cecil Murray famously did during the Los Angeles riots in 1992 when he preached. The truth of the matter, we have no excuse for going around setting fires, for now we have no place where mothers can buy their milk for their children. Had priests offered sacraments and penance, received them, Minneapolis police officers might have found it harder to stand by while they watched the man murdered, knowing he bore the image of God. If Americans sat in pews on Sundays, some of the looters might have been convinced to return what they had stolen. And an American riven by politics might surrender some of its tribal hate and recover its bonds of affection. We have the real thing, and Jesus continues to offend today as he did then, because Jesus is not going to fit perfectly into your political party. Jesus is not going to align perfectly with your ideologies and your preconceptions about how the future of America goes. He's not going to fit neatly. He's going to offend. And if you build your house on him, you will be rejected in some way, but you won't be put to shame in the end because you are putting your foot on the solid ground. We are a temple where God dwells. We are built in a certain way. We are built on a sure foundation of Jesus Christ, but we also have a role to play in the world. And real quickly, at the end of this passage, Peter uses these terms. Most of them, actually, I think all of them, were applied in the Old Testament to the nation of Israel. Peter says that you are a people, a new people, that you are a royal priesthood, that you are a holy nation, that you are precious to God. And we could go through each and every one of those at another time. But the gist of it is this, that you are the new race of God in which every ethnicity can come into. You are the multi-ethnic new race of God. If you want to know the cure of racism, just look at what the church is supposed to be, a new people created of Jews and Gentiles, people from Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, Pontia, all these places that we read about in the New Testament, all of them part of this new multi-ethnic race that one day every tribe and language will bow before Jesus. And this new people, they're priests. They're to mediate God's grace, his goodness, his righteousness to all the world, and they're holy. They're set apart from God. He created all the universe, but he set us apart for this very task, and we are his special possession so that we could proclaim what the NIV says praises, but the word there, actually the Greek word there can be miracles, so I prefer to translate it, to declare his mighty works, the mighty works of the one who called us out of darkness into his glorious light. All of our worship services, all of our liturgy, all of our study groups, all of our fellowship events, all of our missions, all of our outreach activities, even the way that we maintain our property, everything is designed to be built on that rock so that we might proclaim the mighty acts of the one that calls people out of darkness into his glorious light. The church, we are a temple where God dwells. We are a temple built on the foundation of Jesus to proclaim his mighty acts to the world. Would you pray with me? Humbled, Lord, is how I feel right now that you have called us in this way. At a time when your presence made known might be needed more than ever, may you be at work in your church, in your spiritual temple. May we be the people that build our lives and our community on and around you. May we proclaim your mighty acts in everything we do, with everyone we come into contact with. In Christ's name we pray.